In the UK, the National Union of Students has been under the spotlight this week after the election of its first black Muslim woman president in its 94-year history. Campaigns have launched across some universities to persuade students to opt out of the National Union in protest against the appointment of President-elect Malia Bouattia. The opposition stems from long-standing allegations of anti-Semitism from Zionist supporters against Bouattia due to her pro-Palestinian activism. She's also been accused of not supporting a motion condemning the Islamic State group, which was in opposition on the wording and not the principle itself. Bouattia maintains her pro-Palestinian views are towards the ideology of Zionism and not against the Jewish faith. This week's national conference in Brighton elected the current black students officer as president, unseating the current leader Megan Dunn. The 28-year-old secured 50.9% of the vote, with 372 ballots cast in her name, versus Dunn's 328.
Well, now joining me to discuss the controversy around the new election of the president of the Union of Students is Liam McCafferty, who's the postgraduate officer at the University of East Anglia Students' Union in Norwich. And in the studio, I'm joined by the head of media at FOSIS, the Federation of Student Islamic Societies, Aman. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Liam, let me come to you first. Let's deal with this accusation, or series of accusations, that's been doing the rounds in The Guardian, on the BBC report and so forth, that the new president of the National Union of Students holds anti-Semitic views. In your opinion, is there any basis for that?
I think if you look at the media response so far since Malia was elected, it's remarkable how they've managed to they've almost erased the significance of the moment to continue to focus on a series of allegations and accusations which Malia has responded to publicly for a number of times, one of which is the allegations that she has made anti-Semitic remarks in the past. If you look at the response that Malia has actually given, which, if you notice, the Newsnight report didn't mention at all, she quite clearly makes the distinction between the anti-Zionist politics that she holds and Zionism as an ideology and the Jewish faith. And Malia has at numerous points come out and spoke out against anti-Semitism and has been involved in her time as black students officer, involved in Holocaust Memorial Days, in a whole bunch of activities around combating anti-Semitism. So the idea that Malia would in any way be actually anti-Semitic appears to be a deliberate attempt to slur and slander Malia. Partly because, as far as I'm concerned, they are seriously concerned about this because we have for the first time, a radical Muslim woman leading the NUS.
And you were a delegate to the National Union Students' Conference where she was elected. And I've seen the video of her speech to that conference. She seems, in that speech, to explicitly attack anti-Semitic views. Is that right?
Yep, and Malia has made it a constant part of her campaign that she condemns anti-Semitism and she will be involved in fighting anti-Semitism all the way. I mean, she voted in favour of the motion that was at the conference to run a campaign on fighting anti-Semitism. And the truth is there are no grounds to believe that she is anti-Semitic. And if you look at the comments which are actually used to condemn her, the comments from 2011, if you look at the actual context and what she was saying, points around the pro-Israel bias in a lot of the establishment and mainstream media, these are wide-held views and not particularly controversial. And then what appears to have happened is that these have been politicised, they've been weaponised to this claim that she is somehow anti-Semitic, which just isn't the case.
Aman, do you think this is an attack on the entire pro-Palestinian movement? It seems to be that in The Guardian today, for instance, there's an argument that any criticism of the State of Israel is, by definition, anti-Semitic.
And that's the problem that we have, is that the extension of the definition of anti-Semitism has gone that far, where you can't criticise the State of Israel, you can't criticise the Zionist ideology, it's seen as being anti-Semitic. And there's a clear distinction between being against Zionist politics and the ideology, which transfers people of many faiths. It's not just the Jewish faith that belong to that movement. And then you have the people who kind of are attached to the Jewish faith. There's a clear distinction here, and the media has kind of smeared the two together.
Because it's obscuring what should be a moment of celebration, hasn't it? I mean, this is the first time that a black Muslim woman has been elected to the National Union of Students. That surely should be a moment where people say, hey, great.
Yeah, it should be, because, like you said, the first black Muslim person to become president of the National Union. It's a big moment for student politics, and it's kind of her activism throughout the year as Black Students Officer has come to shine through, and that not usually does it happen at the NUS that you have the incumbent unseated, and she actually won. So she's unseated the incumbent, and that just goes to show maybe the lack of confidence that people had in Megan Dunn herself, in that they've elected someone else.
I mean, Liam, there's a lot of criticism going around about the method of election now, at least on the political right, and there's some student unions are saying we're going to disaffiliate from the National Union of Students. But this method of election has always been there, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting if you look at the criticisms in terms of the people who are calling for a change to the electoral method. These are people who weren't saying this before Malia was elected. These are people who have ran the NUS. They have been the establishment of the NUS, and they haven't had a problem for it before until it elected a radical Muslim woman as the president. And I think that's quite telling. And the arguments were made at conference again against why we don't want to move to a different system, because actually the system we have is one that we can use to protect minority groups, to make sure their voice is heard. And it's interesting, if you look at the institutions that are currently threatening disaffiliation in response to Malia's election, it is mostly the elite institutions. It's the Oxford, it's Cambridge, it's the overwhelmingly white middle-class institutions that really seem to have a problem with this.
I mean, again, the NUS actually has been a very open organisation, and in the past, under this election system, it's elected a number of presidents who came from a Jewish background, and it should be proud of that, and it should also be proud of this, surely.
It should, because at the end of the day, a democratic process took place. Students came from all across the UK and placed their votes, and so that choice that was at the end voted in Malia is a voice for the students at the end of the day, and they spoke, and the decision shows that.
I mean, Liam, in a way, it was one of the more democratic elections because, you know, even in a formally democratic system, you can have a kind of sclerotic and bureaucratic approach, and the same people from the same political tendencies get elected year after year. And even where it's formally democratic, it looks pretty much as if it's kind of sewn up. But this was, you know, as Aman was saying, this was one which overturned it. So you'd have thought that Democrats would be happy.
So you would think. I think if you look at the types of why Malia was elected, really, and the kind of students, and there was lots of delegates there who were from smaller colleges who were facing massive attacks in terms of FE cuts in poor deprived areas, and those kind of delegates from those institutions are the people who really do need their voice heard, and the people who really do need change within the NUS. They need the NUS to be doing more, to become more of a fighting union, one that can stand up for its students. In a way which it just hasn't been doing under Megan Dunn, and that came across so clearly. The fact that for the first time in 37 years you had an incumbent president beaten is just simply huge.
And was it, do you think, the smaller colleges representing perhaps some of the poorer, more working class students that powered her election?
I think so. I think if you look at the kind of delegates that were there, I mean, the truth is the reason why one of the flaws in the system has been that it's so expensive to attend national conference for student unions from smaller colleges which are from deprived backgrounds, that in the past they haven't been able to attend. But I think if you look at the work that Malia and her campaign did, they really focused on bringing that message of there is something we can do about this to those kind of delegates in those poorer, deprived working class areas. And it's a message that resonated and got delegates turning up to conference to kind of to make this happen.
Aman, do you think in some way this is a distraction from some of the issues that she wanted to raise? I mean, certainly, you know, obviously anti-racist politics are important to her, and pro-Palestinian politics are important to her. But probably what got her elected was much more mainstream things about the cuts that are happening to education, about defence of the education, about a demand for a free education system, a demand that the NUS should actually protest, which, you know, I mean, many people think of the student union as being a sort of constantly sort of revolutionary body, but it's been a pretty tame body for a lot of years, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Malia's policies were very much mainstream policies. A lot of students related to those policies, and nothing in her manifesto or whatever she in her pledge to become president of the NUS was anything seen as radical in the student sphere. It might be seen outside of it, but it just goes to show the unrest that there's some segments of society that are just uncomfortable with people from a minority background coming and taking a position of influence and power. And it just goes to show that by the smear tactics that have been used on various mainstream media platforms.
I mean, Liam, the conference voted for a national demonstration led by the NUS over education. A few years since that's happened.
Yeah, and I think it's symbolic of the change which is occurring amongst the student body. And if you look at the scale of the kind of challenges that our students are facing in terms of the cuts to maintenance grants, the scrapping of NHS bursaries, and the implementation of the Teaching Excellence Framework, which will look to fully marketise the education system towards a more American model where fees will be able to charge according to how good the institution is, which will mostly benefit elite institutions and mean that poorer, deprived students won't get the chance to go to Oxford and Cambridge. So the stakes are really, really high. And particularly in FE, for example, the area reviews and the cuts to colleges, there is pretty much a fight for survival there. And the attacks are so great and the stakes are so high that I think it really is that students feel that there has to be a change, that NUS has to wake up again. The student movement has to be reinvigorated. And that's what Malia has promised to do. And that's what we have voted for.
I mean, there's a lot of talk these days from politicians about Muslims having to integrate into British society. Now, this attack on Malia's happened at the same time that David Cameron stood up in the Commons and accused under parliamentary privilege Suleiman Ghani of being a defender of ISIS when he's not. And they had, I mean, you know, scenes that I can't remember of opposition MPs shouting racist at him across the Commons. Today we have Boris Johnson saying that Obama's intervention in the referendum debate might be because of his part Kenyan background, his ancestral dislike of the British. I mean, that's a pretty bad 3 days for anybody who thinks that the British society, at least at the top, is going to be welcoming to Muslims, isn't it?
It really is, especially even with the mayoral elections happening with Sadiq Khan, especially some of the tactics that the Conservatives have used in order to smear Sadiq Khan. Not saying that I advocate for Sadiq Khan, but just on a general, the way the attack's been on the media. It just, once again, it's happened so many times that it seems to reoccur all the time. Every time someone who isn't from that privileged background comes and takes a step forward and stands out and speaks for the people, that those tactics are used in order to smear those individuals.
Liam, what do you make of the sort of wider context in which this is happening? Because it's been a pretty grim 3 days in terms, I mean, there's barely a day's passed without some high-level politician making comments which, you know, well, many people, including MPs, have frankly said are racist.
Yeah, and I think it feels very much like, for a long time, we know there has been an issue around the kind of structural Islamophobia that is really pervading through all of our institutions, through the media, through in terms of Westminster. And I think to some extent the fact that we have the response to Malia elected as president and the comments made about Sadiq Khan shows for me a sign of desperation. That they are genuinely scared about this. They're scared that people are coming out and challenging Islamophobia. They talk about great integration to British values. Seemingly that's fine as long as it's about, you know, baking the Queen's cake, but not if it's about challenging the policies of the government.
Were you surprised by the reaction?
We weren't. To be fair, we kind of expected the news to come with not great applause to everyone. But the scale of the attacks have been quite surprising. We would have thought there would be much more focus on the fact that it's the first time that someone from a BME background has been elected. They would celebrate that. The focus would be on the fact that she's been voted because of her great activism and the great track record that she has. Unfortunately, that's not been the case.
Liam, do you think that the left on the NUS Executive were surprised by the scale of the reaction? I mean, we tried to get somebody from the NUS Executive on the programme today, and they just aren't doing interviews.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways we kind of expected there to be a backlash in the run-up to the conference as soon as it became clear that Malia's message was genuinely resonating and that Malia could actually win the presidency. And the whole kind of establishment of NUS, the traditional right wing of NUS, went into panic mode and came out with all these smears. And the truth is, I think I think the response was predictable, but has become, in a lot of ways, I think it's important that everybody who supports Malia and Milia's message is able to get behind her now, and is able to show that we're not standing for these slurs against our leader. This is the leader we have chosen, and that the message and what she believes in and what she wants to do is something that's supported by students up and down the country.
Okay, Liam McCafferty from the Student Union at the University of East Anglia, Aman from FOSIS, thanks very much for joining us.